Welcome back to Beyond the Fourth Wall. We are your hosts.
I'm John.
And I'm Joe, and welcome to the only show that knows the difference between a cosmic cube and a Rubik's Cube, and we're darn proud of it.
Today we're actually going to be talking about something a little bit different. We spent the first two episodes discussing Batman. Yes. Now we're going to explore the other side of the coin, the Marvel Universe, particularly the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Exactly. You can't have Burger King without McDonald's, so that's why we're going to get into this today. The Cinematic Universe is leaps and bounds beyond what I've ever dreamed it was as a kid. I mean, we're at the point now where I feel we're spoiled. We're spoiled, entitled movie brats now because we get a good movie not once, not twice, not even thrice most of the time, but sometimes 4 or 5 times a year. And it wasn't always that way. Remember the beginning of the dark days?
No. As recently as the early 90s, we had virtually no good comic book movies.
No.
We had the Superman franchise throughout the late 70s and 80s, and that sort of spiraled downwards towards the latter half of the decade.
Quest for Peace, yes.
Yeah, that was pretty bad.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the late 90s when we got the first Blade movie. And of all the characters to achieve some sort of commercial success, right, Blade, nobody saw that coming.
I never saw that coming, and I have such fond memories of that movie. I'm sitting there going, my God, Wesley Snipes made me a believer in Blade. Even made me go out and buy the Darkstalkers comic book and, the Spirits of Vengeance and all that. And I'm sitting there going, wow. Because I wasn't so into the character when he first appeared. Blade has pretty humble beginnings. He wasn't in his own book. He was in one of those, anthology tale books. Mm-hmm. Tales to Something. The readers would probably know and the viewers would probably know. But for the movie, when it came out, I caught it on TV.
Yeah,
I didn't even catch it in the theater because it just didn't gravitate to me. And I'm flipping around one night on Cinemax, I believe. Yes, I was flipping around on Cinemax. And I saw Blade, and I said, oh, well, you know what? It's late. I want to watch a movie, so what the hell? So I turned it on. I was astonished how good it was. Just unbelievable from start to finish. And, Wesley Snipes isn't going to win an award for that acting. It was very stoic, but the action was done well. The character, and I thought it was surprisingly adult for what they dealt with.
Yeah, well, that's what captured my attention, because at that time I was 11 years old, and I remember watching it on TV for the first time and thinking, geez, this is pretty grisly stuff, because the opening sequence it's pretty gory.
So good. The garlic, blades and the shurikens that he's throwing. And you're just seeing these things hit, and they don't, get hit and fall down and go, they disintegrate, and they're just poof, gone. And it's just really cool the way that they did the CGI. And that was back before CGI was really prevalent in movies, big time,
And even though some of the CGI hasn't aged all that well, what has aged well, the makeup effects. Because they did apply makeup effects throughout the movie. Yeah. But I think the first comic book movie that really captured my attention from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and we know this is not technically the MCU, we wouldn't get that until the late 2000s.
Correct.
But it was the first X-Men in 2000. That's sort of what laid the groundwork for the formation of the MCU. Because that's what caused the studios to believe, maybe this could be commercially viable after all. Especially so when the second one came out in 2003, I believe it was.
I would say probably 2003 or 2002. But it also proved that Fox can do a movie right, so it was really nice. But for the X-Men movie, I think we were so starving at the time for any comic book movie, we would have done Ambush Bug the movie, would have been happy for us. It would have been really nice to do, Buddy Baker as Animal Man. Actually, I would love to see that movie. I would love to see that would be too. But, that's the thing. We were starving for a movie, and X-Men, when I watch it now, it's nowhere near on par with any of the other movies. But it took chances. Wolverine was tall. He was all of a sudden 6'2", a very handsome guy.
Yeah, they didn't even want...
Not what he's supposed to be.
No, and they didn't even want Hugh Jackman. He wasn't their initial casting choice, but he ended up filling the role perfectly. Yeah. I mean, that's arguably his definitive role now.
When I think of Wolverine, I think Hugh Jackman. Just unbelievable. I mean, he did a great job. And the actor who played Cyclops did a good job. But I always hated Cyclops. From the 90s X-Men cartoon to now, I hated Cyclops. He's a wine bucket.
Yep, I was just going to say that.
Just, you know, when him and Wolverine banter back and forth in the movie, and he's like, "You're a dick, Scott," and he's like, well, "Whatever." You know, it's just they did a good job. Over time, I've come to like Anna Paquin as Rogue. Wasn't my initial choice whatsoever, and I think they went like the Ultimate version with her before the Ultimate even came around. Because Rogue was always this gorgeous, buxom Southern belle with superpowers and a leather jacket.
Older, too.
Right. Anna Paquin was, you know, it got really into that. She was younger. She was about 17. Wolverine's like 150. And it just was very creepy, you know. But they did other things right. Like, Magneto was perfectly cast.
Oh, yeah.
For that time.
Yeah. Sir Ian McKellen, wonderfully done. Even now with the more recent films, Michael Fassbender
amazing.
Delivers stupendous performances.
The other thing, I mean, the casting was well done. Now, was the story that great? No, the story was kind of cookie cutter for me.
Yeah, especially in the first one.
Yes.
See, that's the thing about the first one, is the first one, if you watch it over now, people may feel nostalgic about it, but it's not a great film. Bryan Singer's made better X-Men films since.
Awesome.
Of the first 3 films, the second one is easily the best.
By far.
The first and third ones aren't that great.
No.
Particularly the third one.
Particularly the third one. Bryan Singer, you could tell, had a love for the X-Men. And he decided to make it in a way that... It was also the first realistic comic book movie. Yes, a movie about mutants was realistic in the fact that the way they brought and broached the subject matter and the way they presented it to you, they weren't in flashy costumes. They were in biker outfits with an X on it. You know what I mean? It was very pragmatic the way that they did it. And I was like, okay, this is really cool.
Yeah, they opted to forego the traditional X-Men costumes in favor of something that was a little more grounded, a little more presentable.
Exactly.
They didn't take the campy route at all.
No, not at all. I hear people bitch all the time about, oh, well, Wolverine should have been in the yellow with the mask. Are you kidding me?
No,
he would have looked like bad cosplay.
Yeah, exactly.
It would have been terrible.
Especially at that point in time.
Yes.
Where they didn't have a real big budget yet.
Yes.
The CGI hasn't aged all that well. I will say I'm not a huge fan of Halle Berry as Storm either.
Really?
I wouldn't say she's bad in it exactly. I just think the character could have been done a little bit more. And she never quite got the screen time I think she deserved. And she's got that cheesy line at the end where she ends up blowing Toad off of the...
That's so bad.
That was bad.
I mean, I thought she was good as Storm. They wanted a star African-American woman as Storm. They wanted to, you know, have some star power. So, to play devil's advocate here, who would have you chose? I mean, I thought Halle Berry was fine.
I'm not sure. I have to give that consideration. I think there are other actresses they could have chosen.
I think now Rosario Dawson could have played her.
Yeah, I could see that.
I could see that. I think that would have been really well done.
I think that would have been well done.
But she was a no-name at that time, I would say.
I think a lot of the cast was. Anna Paquin, she had won Best Actress. That's when she was still a kid. She'd grown up a little bit by that point. And like you said, I think she ended up developing into the role more as the series went on. Because she was only featured in the first 3 films.
But going back to that time, yeah, X-Men really kicked things off into a way that, okay, it didn't do spectacular, but it did good to the point where studios go, huh, these nerds are acceptable to this type of entertainment. Let's see what we can do here. We can cook up more of this. So then you brought on X2, which was leaps and bounds above everything.
Drastic improvement.
And I don't think it's just because I think Bryan Singer learned what worked well, but I think he cut the fat of what he cut any camp whatsoever that was in X-Men 1, which was Toad, the worst rendition of Sabretooth of all time. And he went with William Stryker. And that character was played so well. Just unbelievable.
Played to perfection. Probably the best with the exception of Magneto, probably the second best antagonist in the film franchise thus far.
And the thing that the movies do right is that they get the concept of Xavier and Magneto. They are forever enemies and forever friends.
Yeah, exactly.
Neither one of them can stop.
No.
they always just, you know, like Magneto could go off the deep end and, you know, murder a bunch of people, but Charles will still put his hand out at the end reluctantly because he doesn't want to see his friend fall. And I thought that that is what they did so well. Not to mention, how perfect was Patrick Stewart as Professor X? I mean, swear to God, that must have been the easiest casting job in the world. They must have been like, we need a bald guy who's going to sit in a wheelchair who can deliver good lines.
Patrick
Stewart. I mean, there probably was no choice. He was probably expecting the phone to ring like, yes, I heard you're casting a new X-Men movie. I'm sure I'm going to be on the plane.
I accept.
You know, like, I accept in that great voice. Magneto, I think probably they might have had a little bit more of a difference now, but he worked out perfectly. Everyone else, I feel, aside from Magneto, Wolverine, Xavier, you pretty much could have rotated the cast a lot.
Yeah,
a couple surprises.
I agree. But with Magneto and Xavier, you have two great classically trained actors,
yes.
and they imbued their characters with great emotion.
Yeah.
They were able to explore their emotional depths. They were able to convey that to people who were watching the film.
Absolutely.
So even if you sat there and thought, this is pretty campy what I'm watching, you thought, at least these two are delivering great performances. They're selling their roles, and they always did, no matter what film they were in. They
did. And X2 got a little more violent too. And what I liked about X2 was not just the violence, not all the hell of violence. It's not all Mortal Kombat. But what I liked was the subject matter was even better. The X-Men is a social awareness book. It always has been. Because it's racism. Boiled down.
Yeah,
but it's racism on a massive scale. So the X2 movie delved into that where Bobby Drake, who's Iceman, and he was cast really well too. And he went on to do Smallville, and he did a real good job as well. But his parents didn't accept him. You know, here's this school, and he's helping humanity, and he's training to be a hero, and, you know, his brother still has the prejudice that they call the cops. And how great was that scene when the police shoot Wolverine right in the head? They're just like, bang! And he goes down, falls down, and the bullet just pops off because of his healing factor, and he just stands up, and they're like, oh, crap.
Yeah, they tell him to put his claws away, and he goes, I can't.
He's like, put the knives away. I can't, you know? And it's just, they did a really, really good job. And they also broached into the Phoenix at the end of that movie, where I was like, oh, I cannot wait for the third movie. One of the
great X-Men story arcs of all time.
The greatest.
But of course, then we got the third film, and it butchered the story arc.
It was bad.
Bryan Singer ended up leaving the franchise to go and make Superman Returns.
His love letter to Richard Donner.
But Brett Ratner ended up directing The Last Stand, and it felt more like they were doing it for the money.
Yes.
They took the story arc, and they threw a lot of the more important elements out the window. And even though Famke Janssen gives a great performance as Jean Grey,
she always does.
It just didn't turn out to be a very good movie.
The second one put you on such a high, really. You're like, oh, this is going to go even better. And then it just let you down. From the moment Vinnie Jones got cast as the Juggernaut, when he's like, oh, I'm the Juggernaut, I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be so bad. And it did cool things. Like, I was all for the twist with Xavier getting killed. I was like, oh, that's different. But they killed Xavier and Scott within, like, what, the first 30 minutes of the movie for no reason?
Scott gets killed in the first 5 minutes of the film.
No reason.
And he's a major part of the story arc, too.
Right.
You know, a big part of it's supposed to be the love triangle between Jean, Wolverine, and Cyclops, and they went nowhere with that.
Exactly. And I hated that because he's a big factor in the original Phoenix saga about Jean keeping her humanity. That movie would have probably ended a lot differently had it been Scott trying to talk Jean out of the Phoenix at the end and Wolverine chugging along getting, you know, his flesh ripped off. It would have just been so much better. But they threw in things that didn't work. Like, they gave you Marrow for no reason, a really bad version of her. They gave you Angel, which was a poor version of that.
It started out promising enough, but then it went nowhere. They did nothing great with it. They could have done a lot more with the character, because he is an interesting character in the comics. They just didn't. It's like they had an idea and they said, we don't really want to invest the time in exploring this or broadening it at all, so let's just drop it and get into the action.
Yeah, it was like, okay, let's make a movie and throw it all at the wall and see what sticks. It was like Ratner was counting money and he was like, I don't care. do whatever you're gonna do. You know, cut, go, whatever.
It was a sloppy film.
Actually, it was very sloppy. The other thing that it gave us, though, which I was so happy, and it was the only logical choice for me as the Beast, was Kelsey Grammer. Kelsey Grammer's always been the Beast in my mind. Even when I was watching the old cartoon, I'm like, Kelsey Grammer would do this voice and this character so much. And I'd watch Frasier, and I'd be like, God, he'd play an awesome Beast. But I never thought he'd do the role physically. I always thought it was going to be, voiceover.
And they did a good job with the makeup.
And they did such a good job. So I was like, okay. So it gave us that. It teased us with the Sentinel at the beginning. I was like, oh, we're going to get a Sentinel, but then you get the head. And that's it. And that was all they were willing to do, was the Danger Room. It made Jean hard to redeem at that point, because she's a very redeemable character. But she killed everybody. And she didn't have a plan. And then Magneto tried to use her. You took out the Shi'ar. You took out the M'Kraan crystal. All the aspects that make the Phoenix, you took out. So you tried to, ground it more.
Yeah, it's almost as if they didn't want it to seem too fantastical. Mm-hmm. But in that, they lost the core of what the X-Men represent, that heart, that was so integral to the first two films. Because even though the first film wasn't that great, it was still imbued with much more passion than the third film was. But that was sort of indicative of comic book movies in the mid-2000s. You could see they were still finding their way, because not only did we get that, we also got the Daredevil film, which came out in 2003. And that was another film that I feel was made for commercial purposes.
Oh, definitely.
It's similar to the third X-Men film, because we had that, and we also had the success of the first Spider-Man film in 2002. Before we get into that, let's discuss Daredevil very briefly.
It is so bad.
Yeah,
as a Daredevil fan, it was insulting.
Yeah.
And it had all the right ingredients. Kevin Smith had just been coming off of his Guardian Devil story, which brought Daredevil back into being one of the top-tier Marvel Comics characters. So I was very excited. When they cast Colin Farrell as Bullseye, I was psyched for that because he's a capable actor. Michael Clark Duncan, I was iffy on, but not because he was black. It was just, you needed someone huge to do that role, physically huge. And I knew he had, acting chops. It's just from the promo, when I saw him in the white Colonel Sanders style suit, I just said that this isn't right. This is just going to be bad. And then we get the finished product. We get Ben Affleck as Daredevil, who I was very high on. And I believe it is a conspiracy that he got put in Daredevil only because he knew Kevin Smith at that time. Because you see these screen cuts of this movie, it's not Matt Murdock. He doesn't play a very convincing blind person either.
No, that's what I wanted to bring up. I don't think Ben Affleck actually did any research for his role, because I've interacted with a lot of blind people. They don't walk around with dirt face. And that's what he had constantly.
It was hilarious because, hey, I'm blind, folks. That was the extent. It was like how I'm talking to you. He moved naturally, perfectly, everything. And he had that dumb sideways smirk that drove me nuts. And I'm sitting there going, when I heard, just to jump ahead, when he got cast as Batman in the upcoming film next year, which I am excited for, I'm sitting there going, just don't do the smirk. Grimace all you want, but please don't do the Ben Affleck smirk, because I don't like my superheroes smirking sarcastically. It's just wrong. Unless you're the Human Torch, it's just wrong.
Ben Affleck's smirk sort of exudes this arrogance, too, that wasn't befitting of the character. Daredevil's one of Marvel's best characters.
Yes,
top
absolutely.
tier characters. I love Daredevil, and
Me
they've
too.
done some fantastic stories centered around his character.
Sure.
And I don't know how the film went as badly as it did, because everybody just seemed miscast. And like you said, we had these talented actors. Colin Farrell's a capable actor. And even though this was in the early 2000s, when he was starring in bomb after bomb alongside Ben Affleck, who was experiencing the same sort of career nadir at the time, Bullseye was just written so poorly. And the same thing goes for Kingpin. Michael Clark Duncan, everybody remembers him from Green Mile. He was excellent in that. He is a large character. He probably could have embodied the role just fine.
Right.
But he was written poorly. We had Kingpin walking around saying faux shizzle. That's not Kingpin.
Awful. And as far as Bullseye went, they made him a poor man's Joker.
Yes, they did.
And it was brutal. Now, the thing that I thought they did right was the scenes at the church, because anyone who's read Matt Murdock knows that he's a character of complex faith. Mm-hmm. He's Catholic, and it's ingrained in him to do the right thing, but he has to make bad choices. Mm-hmm. So having the priest, his father, always being there worked. The only other saving graces of that movie was Joe Pantoliano as Ben Urich. He was cast perfectly. Every line, everything. I wanted more Ben Urich in the movie. And I liked Jon Favreau as Foggy Nelson too.
Yeah, he was good. I think he was well cast.
But you had Jennifer Garner as Electra Nachos, and just awful.
First off, Electra felt shoehorned into the film.
Very.
And again, this was an example of... I don't think Jennifer Garner quite has a lot of range as an actress, but with a well-written script, she probably would have been just fine. But again, they didn't pay service to Electra at all. And Electra is a pivotal character in Daredevil lore. So
his college days.
They cast her, and then they created a spin-off film called Electra. Now, people thought Daredevil was bad.
That
Electra
was wretched.
was even worse. And Electra represented the worst of what Marvel cinema had to offer at the time.
It was really bad. I mean,
still bad.
It made you think that, this was a fad, that they had blown their load, so to speak, that this is the best it's going to get, and it's going down fast. Yeah. And what Daredevil lacks in everything imaginable, it makes a hell of a coaster. I'll tell you that. I mean, it's just so bad when it's handled so inappropriately. It shows the lack of love and appreciation for the subject matter.
Yeah, there's no integrity that goes into the creation of the film. It's a by-the-numbers film. It felt like they churned it out just to make money. And it's okay they want to make money off of one of these properties, but at least do it well.
Right.
And Daredevil and Electra did not do it well. And that, again, expressed those growing pains that the genre was experiencing as it was starting to become more popular.
Exactly. And when Daredevil's done right, he's Marvel's Batman. Tony Stark is rich, but Matt Murdock's a pretty wealthy guy himself. He does all right. He's a top tier lawyer in New York City. So I mean, he's got the complexity, and he's got the sense of Batman's mission. It's a driving force with him.
Yeah, he grapples with many of the same demons.
Right. And he's a ladies' man like Bruce Wayne is. Mm-hmm. And he does it without seeing. It's just like, he's just very impressive. And it's funny because people say, if you were blind, your other senses heightened. Now, are people doing ninja moves? I don't know. There probably are some blind people that can do this stuff because you have everything else so in tune. Mm-hmm. But what wasn't in tune was that entire movie, and it should have never been made. And then people said, get the director's cut. It's better. I got it. It's worse. I'm so mad at that. It's awful.
Worse because it's more movie. But it's more of the same movie. And I know some people consider the director's cut to be superior to the original theatrical release, but it doesn't fix what is effectively
nothing.
A broken film.
Yeah. And even everything, it was an epic fail before epic fail became a coined phrase, because even the visual aspect of it, let's just start with Daredevil's costume alone, was awful.
Yeah,
it was awful.
The production values,
it was just horrible.
They weren't what you typically see in a comic book movie today.
Right.
But of course, this was at the beginning of the genre's rise to prominence. Around this time, we also got the first two Spider-Man films in 2002 and 2004, respectively. Yes. And if X-Men showed that the comic book genre could be commercially viable, Spider-Man showed that it could also be emotional. And
so good.
We got that in the first film. We got that even more so in the second film, which I think is the pinnacle of the Spider-Man franchise.
But let's talk about the first film. People were worried about, how's Spider-Man going to move on screen? How's it going to look?
Is it going to be...
To this day, the CGI is fantastic.
Yeah, again, particularly in the second film, because he feels like he has more weight to him.
Right.
They got the movements down better. But even in the first one, people were astonished by what they saw. And ended up getting excellent reviews. I think it's at an 89 on Rotten Tomatoes now.
Very hard to do. It was great. I mean, and there's a movie that I thought was cast well, with the exception of a few glaring omissions. Like, number one, Tobey Maguire, for the time, before we got Andrew Garfield, was a fantastic Spider-Man in the first 2 films. I will reiterate, first two films. He brought emotion, he brought honesty, and he brought an energy to the role. You know, and I liked the idea that you could ignore that he was clearly in his late 20s, almost 30s in high school. But I liked the learning curve. Some of my favorite parts is when he's becoming Spider-Man. He's learning to swing off the building, and because he wasn't perfect. And Spider-Man is the everyman, and he's not perfect at all. So that's what made it all the more perfect.
He constantly makes mistakes, and that's what's so appealing about the movie. Is before Batman Begins came along, we had Spider-Man that showed us the true origin of this superhero.
Yes.
He's learning about his powers. He's figuring out how to do things.
Yeah.
He has a lot of personality. And a lot of people complain that Tobey Maguire's portrayal of Peter Parker was too whiny, too dorky.
Not until the third movie.
But even in saying that, that's kind of how Peter Parker was early in the comics.
Exactly.
Even early in the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, he was the same way. He emoted a lot. And
absolutely.
He did the same thing in the first 2 films, but it felt true to his character, I thought.
I thought it was fine. I loved the casting of Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn.
Oh, he chews the scenery, and I know some people don't like that, but...
So good. The best scene of that movie, hands down, Spider-Man 1, to me, is when he's acting in the mirror as Osborn. He's like, he has one talk, and then all of a sudden he's like, out am I? You know what I mean? Like, he's talking to the mirror. It was fantastic. But then they also did Harry Osborn right. I thought, I'm a big Franco fan. I always have been. But Franco is so good in all the movies that they just did a great job with the understanding of Peter and Harry's relationship. Now, where it veered weird for me was not that she's a bad actress, but Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane.
Yeah, Kirsten Dunst, I think, is an underrated actress.
Yes.
She's had some great roles. I mean,
Fargo.
She's excellent on Fargo right now. I think the issue with her is that Mary Jane constantly became a damsel in distress.
Yes.
Every movie. Every single film. That's all they did with her. They always put her in danger, and they didn't present her as a capable individual.
She also didn't look the part. Mary Jane has a certain look to her. When Spider-Man meets her in that famous comic book back in the 60s, and when she goes, "Face it, Tiger," you hit the jackpot. Because there's a build-up to Mary Jane. What people, if you've never seen the comic book and you don't understand, they were teasing Mary Jane for a period of almost a year. Maybe even a little longer than a year in the comic book. She was always the dreaded blind date that Peter never wanted to go on. Like, oh, Aunt May, I don't want to meet this Mary Jane. What does she sound like? She sounds horrible. And then all of a sudden he opens up the door after a really hard day's Spider-Man work, and he's beat to death. And he's like, she's like, "Hi, I'm Mary Jane," and you hit the jackpot. And he's like, "Damn, I did." You know what I mean? And I think the movie just kind of, they went the Clark Kent Superman route with it, because Mary Jane always knew Peter was Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. That was the twist in the comic book. She's like, "Yeah, Peter." And when they explained that in the 70s with the Hobgoblin saga, which is one of my favorite sagas of all time, when he's like, "Yeah, I feel really bad." He's like, "I've got something to tell you. She's like, "You're Spider-Man." And he's like, "What?" And she goes, "Yeah, you think I didn't notice you swinging out next door all the time?" You know, that's what I love about Mary Jane is she's not the damsel in distress.
No.
She's a very capable character. She's very savvy. She's street smart. She's not going to get kidnapped by a thug and not find her way out of it. She's, going to kick him in the groin and keep going. She's also intelligent that they downplay too. Mm-hmm. I just didn't think Kirsten Dunst, and maybe it was because Sam Raimi was trapped in he was in a box when he made Spider-Man. He said, everything Ditko and Stan Lee, yes. Everything that came after that, I'm not going to pay attention to it. So to him, he had to make her that way, which I didn't like at all.
And I think that's part of why the first 3 films are a bit campy as well. Sam Raimi always had a penchant for slapstick humor. We see that in the Evil Dead films. Mm-hmm. And he ended up incorporating that into the Spider-Man films as well. Of course, the Spider-Man films are far more emotional than the Evil Dead films were. But like you said, I think he was a bit beholden to a certain time period. He played in his own little section of the sandbox without going any farther out. And that hurt the franchise in the third film in particular.
Yeah.
But of course, we know the studio interfered as well, shoehorned Venom into it. But before we get to the third film, I want to discuss the second film.
Yeah,
which is fantastic.
Flawless, almost.
Dr. Octopus, I don't think we'll ever get a better take on him.
Never, and I hope they never... He is the one villain. I understand that these movies are franchises and you do reinterpretations. I don't ever want to see another Dr. Octopus. Alfred Molina nailed him.
Perfect.
Just brilliant. And not only did he nail him, but he gave a different layer to his character that has never been seen in the comic books before, and now they've adopted it because it was so well done. Now, I don't know if it was an actor's choice or a director's choice, but he decided to make it that he had a multiple personality and that the arms are sentient, so that they almost kind of like did the devil on his shoulder. And it added another layer to his character. It really gave him, without being punny, legs. You know what I mean? It just, I have no qualms about it. The CGI was done so well that a lot of the time you forget you're watching CGI.
Oh yeah, and then of course we got that famous train sequence where Peter Parker ends up saving a train full of people.
Yes.
And Dr. Octopus ends up mangling the mask, and they all see who he is, and they pass him down the line.
Oh.
Just such a great scene. That's an excellent emotional scene too. That's the Spider-Man franchise at its peak.
Absolutely.
At its absolute best. And Dr. Octopus, with Sam Raimi, we get to see him incorporate more horror elements into the second film as well. Particularly the morgue scene, where we see the emergence of Dr. Octopus, where he completely decimates the room, takes everybody out, and emerges as something new and more terrifying.
I remember kids were scared because, you know, you get a lot of kids going to the Spider-Man movie. You got a big one right here, but I saw kids scared at that scene, and it just was unbelievable. The qualm that people have is that, oh, everyone knows who Peter Parker is in these movies. You know what? That scene that you just described of the train always stands out to me because they all know who he is. But when they looked down at him, they just saw a guy. They saw a young kid. Like when the guy goes, geez, he couldn't be much more older than my son right now. You know what I mean? They realized that Spider-Man is everyone in New York. They tried to do it in the first one, when the Goblin is going around the thing, and he goes, hey, buddy, you want to mess with us? You want to mess with us? Get out of here. You know, and they're all throwing trash in their New York accent.
Too campy.
It was too campy. This was subtle. The music was perfect. Everything was just really well done.
It was a moment that earned it, because we had that excellent action sequence prior to that.
Yeah.
He's just laid his life on the line to save all these people, and the people get that, and they see them as him as the savior that in that moment he is.
Yeah, and going back to Franco, I still get chills because I'm a huge Goblin fan. I always knew that I didn't know they were going to do the Hobgoblin, but I thought they were going to do the Green Goblin. And I was just like, as long as we don't get the Power Ranger suit part 2, I'm happy. That scene at the end where he throws something through the mirror at his father's image because he's haunted, and you see the remnants of the Goblin lair, I was like, oh. I was like a little kid at Christmas. I was so pumped.
Great scene, great teaser.
It was
an example of
teaser.
A great early teaser in a comic book film.
Yes. Yeah. Like those scenes that you get at the end of the movies, that would be the scene that you would get now. And I thought the way they ended it was really well done too, was after the grand fight with Dr. Octopus, who sacrifices himself.
Yeah, well, what that was nice too is Spider-Man doesn't just defeat him. Dr. Octopus makes a decision to sacrifice himself to save everybody else. His humanity wins out.
Right. And I liked the end of the movie where it's just basically Mary Jane has come to grips that he's Spider-Man, and it's here's the police scanner, here's the sirens, and he's just off. And it ends. And that shot at the end where Spider-Man's swinging off screen, but you get Mary Jane leaning in the window and you see Spider-Man through her eyes. Just great filmmaking. But before we go any further, we would be doing a huge disservice if we didn't talk about the best part of the Spider-Man franchise. Do you know what that is?
The cameo appearances by Bruce Campbell.
Those are very fantastic. Actually, those are nerdtastic. No, I'm talking about J.K. Simmons jumping off my comic book as J. Jonah Jameson.
So good.
He is amazing.
that's another example
Can't top him.
of a casting choice I don't know you can ever redo. It's kind of like Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings films. Can you ever recast Ian McKellen?
No.
So how do you recast J.K. Simmons? He's just great in the role. He's perfect.
And if you ever get to see the scene that was cut, have you ever seen it? Where in Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man hangs it up, so he buys Spider-Man's suit at the Bugle. Well, there's a cut scene that if you get the DVD or the Blu-ray, it's J. Jonah Jameson in his office, and it's really dark lit, and you see Spider-Man on top of his desk going and shooting webs, and it turns out to be it's J. Jonah Jameson with the cigar in his mouth, unmasked. That is something that J. Jonah Jameson would do. You know what I mean? So it's just completely impressive the way they did that. But before we close up on Spider-Man, we have to talk. We got all the gushing about the good stuff. Let's get to the bad.
So we have the third film. And the third film was one of the most hyped films
it was
to come out at the point of release.
Yeah.
We had been waiting 3 long years for the conclusion to the trilogy. And everybody was pumped up about it. Everyone was excited. I remember seeing the trailer and gushing like a fanboy because Spider-Man at that point was one of my favorite superheroes.
Still is.
So when the film came out, I was inevitably disappointed.
I was duped. We got hornswoggled.
I remember hornswoggled. That's good.
Horrible.
I remember walking out of the theater and wanting to believe that I had seen a good movie, but not being able to convince myself. It was that critic in me where I walked out of the theater and I said, that wasn't a good movie. I can't convince myself otherwise. That was bad.
I tried too. I walked out and I was like, I had comic book goggles on the first time I walked out of it because me and my buddies were discussing it.
Me too.
And I'm sitting there going, that was a good movie. Oh, was I wrong? Because I see every movie usually like 2 or 3 times if I really love it. And my buddy was like, he's like, I don't know. This didn't work for me. This didn't work for me. This didn't work for me. And I said, well, maybe it's just because I was so happy to get a Spider-Man movie. And then I'm seeing how well it's doing, 170 million and this and that. And I'm sitting there going, okay, well, I'm not the only one who thinks it's good. So he's like, I think you should see it one more time, Joe. And I was like, okay. So I went. And you got to remember, when I first saw it, it was the midnight screening. So I don't know how much of me was actually there.
That's when I saw it, too.
Right. So I don't think my faculties were completely with me. So when I re-saw it, everything was glaringly obvious. It was really bad. First of all, there was more crying in this movie than I have seen in soap opera seasons. I mean, it was awful. Every character cried. Mary Jane cried. Harry cried. The Sandman cried. And then Aunt May cried. And then we had Peter cry, enough for all of them. It was 3 acts of Peter Parker crying.
Peter Parker could have filled a moat with his tears.
Right. And it was that wretched face contorting crying that Tobey Maguire was doing. It was horrible.
They were the kind of tears that did not feel genuine. You
Not
felt
at
like
all.
everybody was forcing their emotions.
I did.
There were no emotional stakes to the film. It just all felt forced.
It was.
And there's nothing wrong with tears in a
No, not at
superhero
all.
film or otherwise, or in real life, but
Right.
this film, it threw them at you.
It
said, you need to feel this way. But you didn't, because the film didn't earn that. It didn't make you
Not at all.
feel emotionally invested in any of the characters. And these are characters that, for the majority of them, we spent 2 full films with them already.
Right.
So we want to see things happen with them. We want to see them grow. We want to see them develop and go through interesting challenges. But that doesn't happen.
No.
Instead, we get Saturday Night Fever.
Oh,
Peter Parker.
that was awful. Complete with the collar up. And if it wasn't as bad enough that we got that scene, we get Bryce Dallas Howard as Gwen Stacy, who I thought was great. And she would have made a fantastic Mary Jane.
Yeah,
She was fine, but she wasn't utilized enough. They did that scene where they go to that Beatnik coffee club and he's like, it was awful. It was just shoehorned in the middle. First of all, he's showcasing he's Spider-Man to everyone in that room, swinging across chandeliers and doing acrobatics. I mean, you can't put 2 and 2 together at that point.
I know.
And then he hits Mary Jane, which was really out of character for Peter Parker.
Yeah.
I get he's in a rage and he's fighting the bouncer or whatever, but when he hits Mary Jane, The scene didn't do what it was supposed to do. It was supposed to make you feel bad for Mary Jane. I went to the midnight showing, and, you know, God bless people in my area. They're honest. They go, take that, bitch! Like, they were happy she got decked in the face, which made you realize how much the movie is just spun out of course at that point.
That says something about the people in the audience, but it also says something about how not so successful the film was at making you care about the characters.
Yeah.
Because you see how emotional people can get about characters and how vicious they can get when they don't like characters. The third film took Mary Jane and they made her an unlikable character.
Very.
When she's supposed to be somebody who is likable, who's charismatic, who's great.
Who's strong.
Who's strong-willed, independent, capable, like we were saying before. And we didn't get that at all. Instead, she ended up becoming a damsel in distress yet again.
Yep.
But I think the only successful element of the film was probably the way that they built up
Bruce Campbell's cameo.
Yeah, Bruce
That was it for me.
I know. That was probably one of two redeeming qualities about the film, because they didn't do Venom well.
No.
Topher Grace was miscast.
Well, that would be just a compliment. He didn't even change his voice inflection as Venom. He's an alien symbiote from another planet who's going to have probably like a gravelly or some type of snake-like voice. Instead, he's like, hey, I'm Eric Foreman as Venom.
It's Eric Foreman cosplaying as Venom.
That was awful. He even did the what the hell? I'm like, oh my God, just bad.
Now, that was the studio's doing.
Yes.
They forced Raimi to shoehorn Venom into the film because they knew people were big fans of Venom.
Yeah.
He was one of Spider-Man's big antagonists. It's a thing. Around that point, the comics weren't really doing anything with Venom, so it's not as if he was an intriguing character. It was just the appearance. People were drawn to the aesthetic of him.
Yeah, it's the 90s quality. People were drawn to the looks of Venom. They look and they go, oh, cool, a dark Spider-Man, dark evil Spider-Man, edgy, rad, man. You know, like that kind of thing. And it doesn't work. And they had so much of a budget for this movie too, which really aggravates me because it shows they put great CGI on the Sandman. And that was Raimi literally, again, not wanting to play outside his sandbox because he was keeping in that Ditko era and saying this is it. Venom didn't come long till the 90s with McFarlane and Larson and everybody and David Michelinie. And it was just really bad. He understood Sandman. Now, I still think if you pull out Eric Foreman as Venom or Topher Grace, I'm always going to call him Eric Foreman. You pull him out as Venom, you get rid of a little bit of the whininess of Mary Jane, you have yourself still 75% of a good movie. It will never be a good movie because none of it worked. I mean, talk about awful scenes for no reason. What was that awful cooking scene of them in the kitchen doing the twist, Mary Jane and Harry Osborn? What did that develop?
That's another one of those subplots he just kind of threw in there.
Yeah.
It just made the plot feel too convoluted.
Mm-hmm.
I think Sandman was the only other redeeming thing that the film had going for it, just because I think Thomas Hayden Church was
a great
good
actor.
as Sandman.
Great.
And I think that when we see the particle test there reduce him to sand,
right,
and his reemergence, I mean, we see him emerging like this
monster,
this creature, and the way it's done is great.
Exactly. That was the horror aspect again.
Exactly. And that's another one of the better scenes in the Spider-Man franchise.
But shoehorning him as Uncle Ben's killer
was just going to say that.
We were mind melding right there.
And that's one of those moments where I walked out of the film and I recalled it and I said to myself, I can't buy into that. That just felt so forced. No. Why do we suddenly incorporate him into Uncle Ben's death? What are they? It's like they were trying to bring it full circle, but they didn't quite know how to.
Exactly.
So they said, okay, let's tie it together by doing this. And it just did not feel natural.
It was, to explain what you said in a previous podcast, it was kind of Tim Burtonizing Spider-Man by giving Spider-Man's uncle's killer a grandiose origin. He had to be somebody special. He couldn't just be a guy. But that's what makes him the guy. And they just lost sight of everything, and they tried, and it just went nowhere good. The other part to me really aggravated me, the butler. You got Harry and Peter at odds with each other, to the point where Peter comes in, and melts half of Harry's face with a pumpkin bomb.
That was actually a pretty good scene.
It was a good scene. It was a good fight scene.
It felt impactful too.
Yeah, it was a good fight scene because that's how they fight. And he was like, take that, Spidey. You're gonna get the keys to the city. But he gets half his face blown off. Peter Parker would never do that. First of all, he would have thrown himself in front of that bomb before it hit Harry.
I think even as Dark Spider-Man, I don't think
he would have never done that.
No, wouldn't have gone that far.
He comes and he goes, the typical superhero team up at the end. Harry, she needs you and me. And then he's like, no, go away. You melted half my face off. So I was like, yeah, dude, I would say the same thing. But then the butler comes in and is like, sir, I've watched you forever. And he comes out with this nugget of knowledge. And he's like, it was your father that killed himself, not Peter. You couldn't have said that 2 movies ago.
I know.
You would have saved the franchise.
Well, it's like the butler existed solely to deliver that kernel of truth to him as well. Oh. But how about this? Another subplot, Amnesiac Harry.
Yes.
It's like they just kept piling plot onto plot onto plot, and it just made it feel so messy.
The Amnesiac Harry, though, I can get behind because Norman Osborn was always an amnesiac, and that's how they kept saying, hey, he's not the Green Goblin right now, because if he was, he'd be attacking Peter Parker at school. Because that's what made Goblin menacing. That's what makes the Goblin Spider-Man's Joker. He knows who he is, he knows everything about him, and he's just as crazy. And he has way more range as far as wealth and resources, so he's a very dangerous character. By the time Spider-Man 3 was done, and I had watched it for a second time without comic book goggles, and I was distraught and upset, I realized at that point, I said, I think the Spider-Man franchise is done. It's Superman forward. I was like, it's done.
And they tried to lure Sam Raimi back to do a 4th film.
Right.
And he was going to do a 4th and 5th film back to back.
Yeah. Was it the Sinister Six?
No, he was going to construct it around the Kraven the Hunter arc, which would have been interesting because Kraven's last time. Great story.
Bruce Campbell as Kraven.
Yeah, that would have been awesome.
He looks like Kraven. It would be perfect. He'd just explain away his cameos.
That would have been hilarious.
But yeah, that's dark subject matter, and I don't know if they'll ever go there on a movie audience because it's too dark.
Spider-Man could, but it's an interesting balancing act because there's always a comedic element to the Spider-Man comics.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's slapstick.
And when Spider-Man gets too dark, it starts to feel unnatural.
Yeah.
And I think with Spider-Man 3, we had a movie that didn't really know what it wanted to do. I think Sam Raimi was burnt out from being fed orders from the studio.
Yeah.
I think the studio was more focused on making as much money as they could as opposed to producing a compelling film. And as a result, the film was commercially successful, but critically, it tanked. And
it was awful.
Even more so with fans. Fans were let down, like you said. They were distraught. And it effectively killed the franchise until we got the subpar reboot in 2011.
I was glad they took so much time between the reboot and, so much time, 3 years. But I was glad that they did it because I think if they had jumped into another Spider-Man movie immediately without introducing you to these characters, it wouldn't have been so widely accepted the way it was. And it just would have really pigeonholed the superhero genre from Marvel's standpoint for a long time. I think it would have just stopped them flat. And that would have been a shame because what it did do right is gave us such an enormously well done foundation for all the great stuff that has come along since then.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's all the time for us today. If you like what you saw and heard, please tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, we'll catch you in the negative zone.
Take care, guys.